Fantastic. Well, it looks like we still got a couple more people joining and coming on in, but we will jump in because we got a full agenda today. Thanks everyone for being here. We're really looking forward to today's topic. We're gonna be talking all around how do you protect your organization? How do you keep your data secure, your clients protected, and ultimately avoid a cyber breach and or just the disruption of any sort of cyber attack on your organization. So we have a full agenda. The first thing kind of wanted to share with you is this great quote by former FBI Director Robert Mueller. He says, "I am convinced that there are only two types of companies, those that have been hacked and those that will be. And even they are now converging into one category, companies that have been hacked and will be hacked again." This is a pretty sobering quote by the former FBI director, and it was 11 years ago that he said this. And over those 11 years, and we'll be talking about trends today a little bit, we've had an exponential increase in cyber crime across the board. And a lot of that's targeting small businesses. So it's targeting organizations like yours because of the lack of infrastructure in place. But then also large organizations, which we'll be talking about a little bit today as well. But ultimately, it's not if, it's when. And so how do you protect your organization? How do you put the systems in place to do everything within reason to have the best cybersecurity practices in place, but then also make sure you're compliant with any regulatory board or organization like a client or third party. So a couple of the things that this webinar is for. So if you're on this webinar, this webinar is really designed for organizations that store a lot of sensitive data. So if you're in the financial firm, or if you're a medical organization, a law firm, even a marketing agency. Marketing agencies are dealing with a lot of sensitive data. This webinar is for your organization. It's designed for organizations. Every organization has some sort of cybersecurity risk, but ultimately it's the ones that have the most data that are going to be the most highly targeted. Another reason we created this webinar and who this is for is organizations that have some sort of compliance. You have a client or vendor regulatory organization asking for a security questionnaire or an audit to be completed. So SOC 2, ISO, there's a lot of other security processes that are out there that organizations will require vendors or whatnot. Even last year, Netflix came out and said, hey, if you want to be a vendor of ours, you need to comply by these cybersecurity best practices. And then if you're a HIPAA or regulated organization or FINRA, you already know around how to complete a security questionnaire audit and the protocols in place. So today we're going to teach you how can you complete one of those and what are the best practices. We'll also be taking a deep dive into the recent US government breach. And we have a member of DHS on the panel today to kind of educate us on what happened, what can we learn, and what can we do differently moving forward in our organization. We'll also be covering the best practices for ultimately preventing a breach, like I mentioned before. Some of the outcomes we're going to be looking for, what you'll get by the end of this webinar, is we're going to help you protect your organization better. We're going to help you build trust with your clients or vendors because you'll have these policies, procedures, things like that in place. And then also help you win more deals. So a lot of our clients are coming to us saying, hey, we have a client that says, fill out the security assessment or questionnaire or we won't do business with you. So we have marketing agencies that have reached out to us, financial firms that have reached out to us, that we've been help them get compliant. That way they can get that new client or vendor. We'll also help you with audit readiness. So by the time this webinar is over with, you'll have the tools to be able to be ready for an audit with a regulatory organization. Awesome. I do want to introduce the presenters today. My name is Taylor Wells. I'm the Director of Marketing here at NW Techs. I've been with the company for going on 5 years, and I really enjoy taking these complex, very nuanced technology problems and opportunities and demystifying them, helping organizations like yours understand how to tackle technology problems, and our organization does that across the board for our clients. I'm also joined by Michael. Michael is from Datto as one of our great partners. Michael represents data at numerous trade shows and technology conferences throughout North America, frequently presenting alongside members of the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI. The objective of these presentations is to connect with business owners and IT professionals to educate them on current cyber threats and the role business plays in combating these threats. I'm also joined by Nick. Nick is a senior policy advisor at the Department of Homeland Security and is a lead advisor for emerging technology and space strategy and policy. He is the author of DHS AI Strategy, DHS Space Policy, and a member of the teams that developed the National Space Policy and Executive Order 13960. Thanks, guys, for being here today. Really appreciate you joining in and helping educate our audience today. Fantastic. A couple housekeeping items here. We will be recording this webinar, so expect the link in the next 24 hours. If you didn't catch everything, I know people are already asking us about handouts and things like that. Expect an email from us with the recording if you want to share it with a colleague or just reference it later. We'll be going through a lot of information today, so feel free to rewatch it. A lot of people that watch our webinars definitely watch them a couple of times as there's a lot of information to absorb. You can submit questions through the Q&A button. The panelists and myself and the other gentlemen here will be reviewing those questions and answering them throughout the webinar. You also submitted questions. I think we got close to 50 submitted questions from you, which is phenomenal. Thank you for submitting those questions. And we will be reviewing those as well and integrating those throughout the presentation. Like I mentioned, there's gonna be a lot of content we're gonna go through. So. But we will have actionable items for you to take. We will have ways for you to implement these solutions throughout the webinar. Awesome. Just to go through the agenda, we're going to be going through definitions, problems, and trends will be the first thing we cover. We'll be going through the recent US government breach, the SolarWinds attack, which you've probably seen all over the news. We're going to be going through 4 crucial areas to focus on to protect your organization. This is the bread and butter, the nuts and bolts of what we do for our clients and how we take them through a robust cybersecurity process. And you guys can mirror it, do it yourself, or have your IT department or your security advisors help you implement the same strategy. We'll also be responding to live Q&A questions like I mentioned, and then also give you helpful ways to get more help. Awesome, I'm gonna jump right into definitions, problems, and trends. So I wanna define a couple terms here, and you've probably heard this term, PII. So what is PII? PII stands for personal identifiable information. This is a kind of an industry term that people in the tech field use to talk about personal sensitive data. So social security numbers, full names, credit card information, driver's license, bank accounts, passwords, and even email addresses are personal information. So this is when you think about your data, when you think about your cybersecurity risk, when you think about what you should be protecting, PII is like at #1 for what you should be the most vigilant in protecting and ensuring that you have the things in place to protect it. There's obviously other risks to your organization. We'll be talking about ransomware when you have a ransomware attack. So there's other areas that are really disruptive, right? If you have a breach in your organization and if you don't even lose any data, it can just be super disruptive. Or there's lots of scams out there like credit card scams where people impersonate somebody on your team and get them to buy credit cards for the cyber criminal. And there's all sorts of other types of cybersecurity risks for your organization. But the #1 most important thing you should be considering is your data, and specifically your personal sensitive data from your clients and whatnot. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, really how do we protect data? And then from there, obviously the other areas of cybersecurity risk and ensuring you don't have any sort of scam and or breach of your organization. Fantastic. Couple problems and trends, and these are things that are very recent and over the past couple of years. Some statistics that came out with, and Microsoft recently came out with a kind of a statement that they've noticed in their organization, and not to beat a dead horse for lack of a better expression, But 2020 was an incredibly challenging year, but it also pushed technology to some new limits. And they say within 1 year we had 10 years of innovation, which is pretty astounding and pretty amazing. Which is great. There's a lot of benefits of that, right? Of your organization to work, have a dispersed workforce, to being able to do events like this, right? Like connect with people over webinars or over video conferencing. But it also opens up a lot of new challenges, like hosting things in the cloud. That's its own cybersecurity risk now. Whereas you may have hosted things locally on servers or workstation, now things are in the cloud. So that's a whole nother gambit of challenges and opportunities for your organization. So when you think about technology, you realize that we've progressed a lot in this past year and a half, and ultimately we're dealing with new problems. So educating ourselves around the new problems your organization might be dealing with. A couple other interesting trends and things that we're seeing is small businesses have the highest malicious email rate at 1 in 323. So basically what that means is small businesses are targeted with malicious emails, whether it's a phishing email, whether it's a malware attachment email. Ultimately, small businesses are targeted at the most, out of every 300 plus emails, one of those is going to be a malicious email, which is pretty astounding since I know I get at least 300 emails a day. And I've seen a lot of malicious emails come in. So small businesses, the point of this is that small businesses are targeted more than larger organizations in a lot of regards. Especially when it comes to things like malicious emails. So being vigilant in your small organization to be aware of those emails and have the right training in place and things like that to respond to it. Number 3 would be the average cost of data breach has increased. The former number was, I think, just under 3 million. The average cost of a data breach is 3.86 million as of 2020 for IBM. So this is large organizations, small organizations, and just the average medium between the two. And this is to kind of present the seriousness of it when you do have a breach. So having the things in place, maybe even like cybersecurity insurance, having that in place if you were to have that breach. Another way to look at it is on average, if you were to lose one contact, one PII, one personal identifiable information, it equates to about $150 in loss. And a lot of this loss is maybe lawsuits and the obligation you have to your clients and things like that. But it also is just disruption to your organization. So the amount of technology, the disruption to your staff and your team kind of equates into this total cost of a breach. Another stat here, Verizon came out with that 43% of cyber attacks target small organizations. This kind of plays back into problem number 2, which is the malicious email rate. But almost 50% of the targeted attacks are for small organizations. This is for a couple reasons. First, they don't have the technology in place like larger organizations. They don't have the resources, the tech teams, things like that. And then they still have a lot of sensitive data, right? If you're a law firm or a financial firm or a medical organization, it's still ripe for the picking when it comes to from a cyber criminal standpoint. Another data here is 98% of cyber attacks rely on social engineering. This is probably one of the most important stats here. And social engineering is essentially where, and the way to look at it is the cyber criminal isn't breaking down the door, right? Isn't just like trying a bunch of passwords to get into your login. They're actually knocking on the door. They're saying, hey, can you let me in? By either impersonating somebody or sending a malicious email, or even calling your organization, getting people to give up information, or somebody walking into your office and they see your password on your password written on your screen. Or there's all sorts of different ways socially engineered attacks, and they're getting super smart and super developed, where they sometimes last months, where they're watching your organization, looking at your organization, and seeing opportunities to get in. And it's 98% of the time they rely on you letting them into the organization. So training, having awareness in place, things like that are super important to make sure you and your staff know, hey, how are people getting into the organization? How are we letting them in? Because it's not just people breaking down the door. That definitely does happen. So having strong passwords, MFA, all sorts of other security features are super important. But ensuring your staff just knows phishing, things like that, other sorts of ways where people are letting them into your organization. Damage related, number 6 is damage related to cybercrime is projected to hit $10.5 trillion annually by 2025. This is kind of a big number, right? That's just showing the level of damage these cyber criminals are doing. And it is definitely something that is only going to get more of a challenge as we get more virtual, as we get more reliant on digital technology. So it's a problem that's not going away. Awesome. And then last but not least, phishing increased in 2020 to account for 1 in every 2,400 emails. So phishing attacks is when somebody is sending you an email and impersonating an organization. Maybe it's your bank, maybe it's Netflix, maybe it's Facebook. They're impersonating that organization and telling you to, hey, reset my password or update this information. And out of every 2,400 emails that go out, one of them is a phishing email. So you look at across the board of your organization, you're getting phishing emails, and some of them get caught by spam, but there's a lot of them out there. So being vigilant and understanding what those are. Fantastic. I know we just went over a lot of information. If you already know you need more help, we're an IT company. We help small organizations with this technology. We help them mitigate these problems. We have really cost-effective solutions. You can book a discovery call with us. You can go to nwtex.com/discovery call, or just go to our website, NWTex, and you can click on the button there to schedule a call with us. We focus on small organizations like yours, and we have affordable cybersecurity programs that can help you mitigate a lot of those problems and put the best solutions in place. So feel free to reach out. We can spend 30 minutes to talk about your organization, see if we have some good solutions to help you fix those problems. Awesome. So the next agenda item is I'm going to have Nick from DHS kind of give us an overview of what happened in the SolarWinds breach, and really what can we learn from it, what happened, and then what can we learn from it. So Nick, thanks so much, and take it away.
Thanks very much, Taylor, and thanks to NWTex for the privilege to speak here today. It was quite a busy holiday season for cybersecurity, and forums like this one are really important to so we can continue to improve our overall cybersecurity posture. So getting right into it, there's been a lot of news coverage of SolarWinds and the breach, and what I want to emphasize that maybe goes a little bit beyond what's in the news is that this was a supply chain attack, and supply chain attacks are really important things to understand, especially when you're a smaller organization, a small business, because they can affect your cybersecurity as much as the traditional types of attacks that Taylor was just describing. So traditionally, we tend to think of cybersecurity in terms of this much more direct approach, the breaking down the door, as Taylor called it, with things like malicious links, unauthorized access to the network, Trojanized files, USB drives inserted into machines, man-in-the-middle attacks, things like that. But a supply chain is both a lot more dangerous in some ways and more frustrating, because your organization is going to receive software that's already bad before you even take possession of it. And so in the case of the SolarWinds attacks, the attackers were able to engineer code that lay dormant for weeks, so it surpassed all of the scans, and then it was able to bury itself deep into software functions. And these were essential software functions inside of IT programs that were just boring enough to not really get our attention, or to require a lot of organizations to look at it every day, but just essential enough to really be valuable to an adversary. And so in the simplest terms, you can think of like how a supply chain attack would go down in kind of two ways. So first, an attacker is going to identify a supplier along your supply chain and a specific step in that supply chain that's vulnerable. And what they're going to do is they're going to think about either taking an approach where they engineer code and they gain remote access to engineer or to scan the system and engineer the tool that they're going to embed. Another way, and Taylor already touched on this, but the attacker can use social engineering to have an employee do something wittingly or unwittingly that's going to give them access to the system that they require. So it's critical to understand how a supply chain attack can unfold, because when you purchase the software, their vulnerabilities become your vulnerabilities. And that's a really important point in cybersecurity. So if I were going to plan a supply chain operation, I would do two things in parallel right off the top. The first thing I would do is I would use social media and I would social engineering to spot, assess, and develop potential human source that's inside the target supplier that has access to the system that I want. The next thing I would do is I would start developing malware capabilities to try and hack the system directly. But remember, it is a lot more expensive to, and sometimes a lot more, it takes a lot more time to directly hack a system and gain that remote access. Whereas if I can I can get someone to do it for me, I can get them to open the door after I knock, as Taylor described, then that's going to be both faster and cheaper to get what I want out of it. So if I were doing this, it would take me a matter of maybe 1 or 2 months to gather enough information via social media about potential targets that could have access to what I want. I could do, as I'm looking at their social media, I can learn plenty of information about them that will let me know whether they're suitable for me to approach, for me to befriend, to use some type of social engineering, because I can learn all kinds of things on social media, such as favorite sports teams, things about children, patterns of life, financial situations. And then I can cook up a persona that is attractive to that person. I can start having conversations with that person, and eventually I can walk them to what I want, which is to get access to the system that I want. And even if this costs me $500,000 to pay some employee to give me something that I want, it's still a bargain. So let's think about what this means, and let's think about what in the case of SolarWinds, what did the Russian government gain, and what would it mean if something similar happened to you? So the Russian government almost certainly had a specially designed database that they were able to search for specific things, and they were basically searching all of the data across multiple US government agencies. So think about the value, the intelligence value that they had behind that. I mean, that is a really powerful intelligence machine. But consider for a moment, what if that was your value chain information? What if that was your intellectual property, your proprietary information? What would it mean to have, whether it was thieves of intellectual property, competitors, or just criminals, be able to literally have a searchable database that could pull all of your information down just using some simple search terms? And that's exactly what the Russian government almost certainly had. From March to December, they were able to pull mountains of emails, documents, PowerPoints, and could search anything about plans and intentions of the US government across multiple agencies. And that has a lot of implications to not only what we do as the US government, but also into small business if a similar thing were to happen to you. So what do we learn from all this? What does this all mean for you, for a small business? So a couple of things, right? So first, the number one is you have to both understand and audit your supply chain. Cybersecurity measures against direct attacks will always remain a high priority, and they're always going to evolve. But but this isn't just about password management or malware detection. How devastating would it be if your organization procured poison software and had no idea that it was infiltrated? Because it ducked all of your normal malware detection capabilities. So consider how devastating that would be. So you have to know your suppliers, understand your supply chain, and you have to periodically audit the security posture of those suppliers and your supply chain. You have to put things into place like metrics that you expect your suppliers to meet and agree on those things. The second lesson is the vulnerabilities of your supply chain are your vulnerabilities. So when you're doing a cyber risk assessment, for example, you're thinking about where the risk is and who owns the risk. Well, the risk that it may appear from the outside is owned by your vendor is actually owned by you, because you're taking that software, you are trusting them on some level to also have good cybersecurity. And if they don't, it impacts you. And think about SolarWinds. SolarWinds was a company whose express purpose was to detect malicious software. And they themselves got hit with malicious software. And it was active from March to December. So this is not as if this was something that was a small company that was not able to put the proper measurements in place. I mean, this was a company with millions of dollars in profit and revenue and capabilities to build what they needed to build. So your organization has to have a very frank discussion with all the elements of your supply chain regarding security. We're talking about the security from the design through the logistics chain to the actual installation and operation at your organization. That entire chain is extraordinarily important, and it's something that's being looked at the government through multiple areas, including actually the space supply chain. So building things in from the design phase is critically important. The second thing is make sure you have a frank internal discussion within your organization about the balance between efficiency, costs, and security. This is sometimes not easy, but think about what the costs of not doing it might be. Now, DHS is the US government's leader in cybersecurity, and our Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency has a robust outreach program and many resources that can help small businesses with their security. So I encourage everyone here to visit CISA.gov to see the range of products, services, and information that's available to improve your cybersecurity. You'd be impressed at how much they have. I also encourage everyone to reach out to me. I work in the Office of Cyber Infrastructure Risk and Resilience Policy. If you want to discuss maybe strategy and policy for cybersecurity for your organization. So I'm going to stop there for now, and I'm happy to field questions kind of at the end. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak, and back over to you, Taylor. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. That was great. And yeah, I think from the whole kind of one thing I was thinking about, or one takeaway, what you mentioned was we're all going to be thinking twice about our vendors moving forward. And I think it was a wake-up call. I think the attack was a wake-up call because it wasn't, we haven't had the hard conversations like you mentioned as far as efficiency, costs, and security in regards to our vendors. We've kind of just said, okay, yeah, if there's a cloud solution, let's use it, and they're cost effective or whatnot. And I have noticed in the past couple of years an exponential increase in just applications we're using. Like, 3 years ago, an organization may have used 50 different applications for the organization. Now it's in the hundreds, and the amount of logins and passwords and just the amount of different vendors we're using is astounding. So second guessing and questioning, hey, should we use that software? Should we use that vendor? Has our IT provider or our managed security provider vetted them? Have they looked at this product or solution and made it work? I think that was super helpful, and ultimately, yeah, I think that's a really helpful thing to remember and a wake-up call, because it's not just all the typical things we think of when it comes to cybersecurity, like ransomware, malware, or phishing attacks. I think the problem with cyber criminals is they're always thinking of the opportunities, the what ifs. And as an organization, you're just thinking about the direct relation to the issues you have at hand, right? Or maybe historically, what have you seen be compromised? Whereas the cyber criminals are like, what are the potential opportunities? So within that gap of looking at, hey, we got to look at what are the potential opportunities, not just the historical attacks. And I think things like supply chain attacks is a huge wake-up call for everyone to look at, hey, who are we partnering with? Who are our vendors? What types of software are we installing on our computers? Is it just some random software we looked up on Google, and it may be something as small as a task manager, right, or a project manager but there's a lot of different ways for those types of supply chain attacks to get into your organization. So super helpful. Thanks for sharing, Nick. We're going to move on to kind of the 4 areas you should focus on to mitigate a lot of these attacks. And this is kind of our framework, NWTech's framework, for how we view technology, cybersecurity in particular. So our first kind of framework part of our process is you need to create a rule book for your organization. So this is kind of like the baseline. You need to have policies and procedures in place that are custom to your organization, that help you navigate everything from termination policies to disaster recovery policies to facility security management and others. There's an emergency operation plan. All of these plans and procedures you're seeing here are all are pretty industry standard. There's actually more that we do for our clients, privacy policies, things like that, that are not listed here. But this is kind of the baseline, because and the reason why is you need to have a custom rule book for your organization that says, hey, here is how we're managing data. Here is how we're storing it, deleting it, backing it up. And then here's who has access to it. Here's how we manage termination policies. And the reason why you need that is a couple of reasons. Number one is ultimately you need to be proactive in regards to all of these areas, right? So if you were to come across a situation, you're able to have a policy in place to mitigate the problem. And then also you can show it to your vendors or regulatory organizations. Says, hey, here's how we respond to these issues. Here's how we're being proactive with our cybersecurity. And ultimately, you write these down, right? And so you still need to enforce them. So we'll talk about that in a few minutes as far as, hey, how do you enforce these policies and how do you make sure you're actually doing all these things? But having these dozen to 15 policies will cover kind of all the different areas, from your vendors to how you manage data, how do you have an emergency operation plan, how do you respond to a cybersecurity breach, and covers everything for you. So we've already gone through a lot of information, and I'm sure it's overwhelming for a lot of you as far as like, where do I start? And you kind of get with cybersecurity. I've been working in this industry for, like I mentioned, going on 5 years. But before that, and the other small businesses I worked in, whenever I heard of cybersecurity, I kind of just it's almost like a fatalistic, froze in my tracks. Where I'm like, well, all Fortune 500 companies get attacked. Government agencies get attacked and get compromised. What can I do, right? What can our organization do? And these policies is that first step. It's that first step in being like, hey, here's how we're going to be proactive. And once again, nothing's 100%, right? But it covers a lot. And so you can be proactive in regards to things like password management or MFA, or how you manage data, or who has access to what. So it does 2 things, and ultimately the policies allow you to show that you have things in place for regulatory organizations, but it also allows you to be able to be proactive and actually go through all those areas and make sure you have the right things in place. Some of the benefits here on this next slide relate to kind of the outcomes. So one of the policies under one of the policies, we talk about MFA and how do you manage multi-factor authentication. And Google came out with a study, and I love the study here because they showed that if you simply add a phone number to a Google account, you can block up to 100% of automated bots, 99% of bulk phishing attacks, and 66% of targeted attacks that occurred during their investigation. So really cool. So once again, if you have a robust MFA policy, we're like, hey, every single account organization needs to have multi-factor authentication, where you either have an authenticator app or you either have a phone number that you get that code. It's annoying. We all understand to get the codes and enter them and stuff like that. But if you do that, Google has shown that under their accounts, you can block a lot of cyber crime. And I love that 66% of targeted attacks, right? So those are social engineered attacks. Those are attacks that they're spending a lot of effort in trying to get into this Google account. So really good example of how and that policy in particular MFA policy has a great outcome. And obviously all the other policies have outcomes that are similar to that, where you can greatly increase, once again, nothing's 100%, right? But you can greatly increase your policies. And then what we like to tell our clients is you can show you were doing your due diligence, right? You had the policies in place, you were doing the work, and ultimately leaving the rest where you're able to, you put in the hard work, you did the due diligence, and you did your best in that regard. So, and a great example of it actually does work, right? So MFA is a great example that does work, and there's other policies that work as well. Another thing I'd love to talk about is disaster recovery. So another policy that your organization should have is in regards to disaster recovery. And so how does your organization manage disaster recovery? And ultimately, if you were to get hit with ransomware, right? Do you have the backups in place? Do you have the other sorts of tools in place? And I love to bring Michael in here. Michael's with Datto, and they are experts in disaster recovery and backups and having redundancy in place. So Michael, please share with us a little bit around disaster recovery, backup strategies. Why is it so important to make sure you have a disaster plan in place?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm in the world of backup disaster recovery. And I think one of the pitfalls is a lot of businesses see this as something you kind of buy off the shelf. You know, oh, I have a Datto in place, I'm good. It actually is just one piece of a multi-layered approach, as well as you need these policies and procedures for several reasons. One, it creates that culture of security, right? Everybody, you're getting buy-in from those folks. But also it's needed for a lot of different problems. I mean, if you get hit with ransomware, or you get hit with one of these attacks, depending on the state you're in or the industry you're in, you're required to report those within 48 to 72 hours. So you better have that plan in place prior to, because you're not going to be able to go back and do it. But to kind of take a step back on the why, and unfortunately, we in the IT space, we keep saying, well, now the business community is opening their eyes to this, and now everybody's understanding it. We do a ransomware study every year where we focus on the small business community. At the end of the day, we looked at it and we asked small business owners, are you highly concerned about ransomware in 2021? The number was 30%. 70% of small business owners were not highly concerned about an epidemic that's a multi-billion-dollar year industry just on the SMB space. So the why, you know, we almost take it for granted. Like, of course you have a policy and procedure in place because me, Taylor, Nick, we all live in that world. But the reality is it's not. So first you have to understand the why. First and foremost is to protect your business. Second is to create that culture of security within everybody in your organization. And then third, when you get into the compliance issues, or even you mentioned cybersecurity insurance, even in the underwriting process of that, they're going to want to see that because are you high risk or are you not high risk? It's like, am I going to give life insurance to a smoker or a non-smoker, right? What's more risk to them? So you start there. And I think when you start creating this plan, it's very important to get third-party input, but also create a task force within your organization. Get buy-in from the different departments, because again, we all kind of live in our own silos. And so to hear something from a specific team that you might not have thought of, obviously adds to a better and more layered approach to that policy, but it also brings buy-in, because this policy and procedure means nothing if everybody in your organization doesn't follow it, right? And then to the point of having within that policy and procedures some vetting of your vendors, that's a no-brainer. And beyond that, your client should be asking the same of you. So you could proactively go out, and it's really a differentiator for you to say, these are all the things we're doing. Even though you didn't ask for it, I want to let you know, here's our policies and procedures, and this is what we're doing. Datto, we only work with managed service providers, so folks like Taylor, right? We require MFA for folks to use our products because, hey, we're only as vulnerable as these guys, right? Because you couldn't come to me and buy a Datto. We work through this network of managed service providers. So not only do we have it required internally of us, every morning when I sign in, I've got to get a little alert to my phone and it does a facial recognition and then I can get in. We require our partners to do that as well. And that's, again, part of the vetting process, anybody that can have access to it. So when you look at those policies and procedures, it really isn't a piece of technology. It isn't something you buy off the shelf. It isn't something that you write up and you're done with. It's got to be a living and breathing document that's going to adjust with the times. And, you know, I think just the emphasis on getting this down in writing somewhere, have it be accessible, have simple things like who are emergency contacts for people. Simple things like that. If you are, you have regulatory compliance, have a template written out for if you do get an attack, you're not staring at a blank screen writing this up. Speak with a lawyer and have that in place, because you've got to report that in 48 hours. That should be, in the appendix of your report, just in case things go wrong. You know exactly where everybody goes, and even test some of these folks. Do dry run tests. What happens if this? Does everybody in your organization know who to call? Prior to coming to Datto, I was in the construction management industry doing business development over there. If I clicked on a malicious site and I got the scary red ransomware screen, is my first reaction to walk down and talk to my boss? Probably not. I wouldn't know what to do. I try to remediate it on my own. They, just like a fire drill, you know where to go, you know what to do. Everyone in the organization should know, hopefully they never click on anything, but if they do open that door, they need to know what to do. How do you isolate that machine? Who do I call? What are those next steps to start recovering? There's a lot of technologies in that, but it really becomes more of a holistic approach. Don't focus on, do I have the best DR technology? It's, do I have the best holistic plan to combat this? Because they're waiting again for somebody to open that door. It's mostly that way instead of the brute force, especially at the SMB level.
Michael, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing. And I think you hit something that I didn't hit earlier, which is the culture. And I think I think having the rule book, the policies and procedures for the culture and getting buy-in is super important, because a lot of attacks are, there's one example of an attack, which we'll talk about cybersecurity training here in a second. But one of the attacks a lot of times happens is they'll target one employee, and if that employee doesn't give up information, or if they recognize it's an attack, they'll then target somebody else. So what will happen is, we've seen where one employee, they try with one employee, and that employee, doesn't give up information, or the phishing attack doesn't work, or whatever, the socially engineered attack doesn't work. And then either the employee says, "Hi, you didn't get me," and then the cyber criminal is like, "Okay, well, I'm going to try somebody else." And if those employees aren't talking, if we don't have a culture of talking around, hey, how do we address these issues? What are our policies? What are the best practice our organization's doing? Then maybe those conversations aren't happening, and it just gives that much more ammo to the cyber criminals to be able to try different types of things if we don't have a culture of communicating. And I love that. That was super helpful. Thanks for sharing, Michael.
Yeah, and just to quickly piggyback on that,
yeah,
we do something
totally
similar. We have a Slack channel where if we, at the whole company, and if we see something suspicious, we send it out. And a lot of times people will say, "I got that same email." And so we want to highlight that.
Yeah.
Be on the lookout for this email, because they're probably coming after Datto with this, and they're going to blanket spread it. So just the ability to share that, and that's the first thing I do in the morning, is take a look at that. It's super simple. It doesn't cost anything. Again, it's just that culture of security.
I love it. Yep, and being vigilant. I think having that, that's super cool. I love that. I think I'll talk to our team, because we should do something like that too, of just communicating, having an open communication where people feel comfortable. Because it's kind of embarrassing, like if you were to fall for something, if you do click on a phishing link, it can be really embarrassing, and it can be like, "Oh, am I going to lose my job?" And so having a culture of like, "Hey, you know what? We want you to share with us. We want to share with you. People make mistakes, right? No one's perfect." And so either creating a culture of at least report attempts, and then beyond that, if you were to accidentally do something, or if you were hesitant, like, "Oh, is that the right login? Did I actually, log into the right account there, or whatnot?" You can report that to your IT department, report that to your manager or your leadership. Super great. Thanks, Michael. That's a great add-on there. One of the areas, so we just talked about policies and procedures, and it's so important to create a rule book for your culture, to know how to navigate all these areas in advance, right? That way you're not being reactive in the case of attack, or just knowing all the different areas. If you go through all those policies, there's a lot there, and there's a lot of areas that you may have not ever addressed, right? Of how do we address this type of security risk? So as you do that, once you create your policies and procedures, you're going to want to do an annual risk assessment every year moving forward, for a couple reasons. And basically what an annual risk assessment is they're different, people have different versions of them depending on regulatory compliance, depending on your organization. But basically what this is taking you through, hey, are you actually doing the things that you said you're going to do, right? Are you actually fulfilling the commitments you said in the policy? So you should be auditing yourself every year to do a couple things. First, number one, I'm sure, as like I mentioned, you're actually enforcing the rule book and the policies you created. So this will give you a document to share with regulatories or third parties that you said, hey, every year we're checking to make sure we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. And then second, you're also allows you to see areas of improvement. So for example, we talked about supply chain attacks and the recent SolarWinds attacks. Well, maybe your organization should update your policies to ensure that you are vetting your vendors, right? So an annual risk assessment will go through and help you ask those questions of, hey, are there any areas of improvement? Do we need to update our policies? Like I mentioned, the Microsoft quote, right? We've had a ton of evolution in regards to the IT space, and so things are going to change, and they're going to change 5 years down the road, right? And when you start adding AI and you start adding technologies evolving so quickly and so fast, I work in the industry, and it makes my head spin some days of like adapting to new forms of technology. So this second point is super important because your policies, like Michael was saying, they have to be a living document. They have to evolve. They have to improve. And what you did last year probably is not going to work for this year. You probably have new vendors, you have new employees, you have maybe a distributed workforce, people are working remotely. So you have new challenges. You need to make sure you're auditing yourself. Doing an internal audit is basically what the risk assessment is. And then, like I mentioned already, it usually is required for many third-party questionnaires, regulatory or not. So if you have a client, we have clients that have clients that ask them to fill out an annual risk assessment to make sure they're doing the things. We help them fill that out for them, and then we also help them do their own internal. So having the posture and the cadence of doing an annual risk assessment is super important to make sure, hey, are we evolving? Are we actually enforcing our policies? And then number three, can we document? Do we have a track record of showing to our clients, vendors, regulatory organizations that we're doing the work and that we're actually doing all the things we said we're going to do? Awesome. The next pillar and kind of area is cybersecurity awareness training. So this is something we do for our organization internally, and something we provide for our clients, where we have kind of an automated system that has weekly training. It has an annual test that you take, each employee in our team, and they're graded. And there's things like phishing. Pretty cool, actually. We have a phishing simulator where every week it sends out fake phishing emails. So it's almost like a double negative, fake phishing emails. But basically it sends out weekly emails that test us, everyone, I get them myself, that look legitimate. It looks like Facebook email, it looks like an email from, even some of our vendors, right? Services that we use, and they look legitimate, and it says, hey, reset your password or update your information, or we have an update or whatever. And it's just getting us focused on, hey, like we mentioned before, creating a culture of cybersecurity and creating a culture of being on our toes, and really thinking before you click, right? So many of socially engineered attacks ultimately are getting people to just think, are relying on people not to think before they click. So being vigilant about that. In cybersecurity training, there's lots of different types of programs out there, but the main idea is, hey, keep your team aware of all the current trends, because they're constantly changing. Like in 2020, there was COVID scams out there. There was stimulus check scams out there. There was all sorts of different scams that were unique to 2020. There was all sorts of different things that we saw come up last year that organizations were being responded to. So you need a system that's training people around the most current trends, and then just keeping it front of mind, right? Like, okay, what are the best practices we should have in regards to cybersecurity training? So like I mentioned, the stat earlier, 98% of cyber attacks rely on socially engineering. So it's super important that all of us are aware of the current trends, the current attacks out there, and that we're being trained on them. Next thing is this is a cool study by this group that it's a technology group that they did a study of all their clients, and they showed that the security awareness training can reduce the risk of socially engineered threats by up to 70%. So a super cool study. Go look for this group online, and you can read the whole study of what they did. But essentially, what they showed was that they were able to reduce socially engineered cyber attacks by up to 70% by having cybersecurity awareness training. Even if it was only 30%, if it was 35%, if it was half of that, I would be super happy with that, right? As an outcome of cybersecurity training. So it does work. We've seen, and even in our organization, we're more aware, we're more capable of responding to these attacks and aware of these things. Then last but not least, a lot of regulatory frameworks and laws either recommend or require organizations to carry out cybersecurity training. So as you've probably seen, there's a trend. We've talked about two things here. Number one, how do we keep your organization and prepare your organization to be the most secure possibly can be, within reason, right? Nothing's 100%. If you want to be secure, you shouldn't use technology. I remember hearing a quote by a technology expert that said, the most secure organizations are the ones that don't use technology. Well, that's not the reality we work in. And all of our organizations use technology to one extent or the other. So how do we do everything within reason to keep your organization secure? And then number two, how do we make sure you're ready for compliance related things, like if you have SOC 2 or SOC 1 compliance need, or a regulatory organization. So policies, procedures, annual risk assessment, cybersecurity training are all things that are usually recommended or required if you want to be compliant with a regulatory board or the vast majority of the cybersecurity assessments out there. So that's kind of the whole main goal between all of these things, is keep your organization secure. And then number two, how do we keep you compliant? The fourth area is audit readiness. So especially in the past 2 years, we've greatly increased our cybersecurity services, because we not only saw the need for people getting attacked, but we just had clients coming to us saying, hey, I got a regulatory board, or I got a client or a vendor asking me to fill out a questionnaire or assessment. So this kind of relates to the supply chain attacks, right? A lot of clients or vendors or government agencies don't want to work with organizations that don't have the best practices in place, because it can then lead to an issue with their organization. So being ready to fill out an audit, being ready to, especially if you have a lot of sensitive data, especially if your organization has a lot of PII and personal identifiable information, to be ready for an audit. If you're not getting audited now, if you don't have compliance issues now, it may happen in the future. So putting all these things in place, that way, if you do get audited, or you do have a client that says, hey, fill out this questionnaire before we work with you, you're ready for it. And so ultimately the question is, have you ever filled out or completed a third-party security questionnaire from a client, vendor, or regulatory organization? They can be extremely complex and specific to their needs and requirements. So we talked about putting policies in place, annual risk assessment, cybersecurity training. Those are all specific to your organization. So how does your organization want to tackle cybersecurity? And then this fourth pillar, being audit readiness, it's how are you ready to be compliant with other people's cybersecurity needs and requirements, because every organization is different. Every organization has a different stack of technology. So they're going to have different requirements. So if you're a HIPAA regulated organization, you're going to have different requirements than a FINRA or a SOC 2 or an ISO regulated industry. So how does your regulatory organization or client or vendor, what are their specific needs? We help our clients fill out these audits, and we help them complete them because it's kind of mirroring two things, right? We put the policies, procedures in place, but then we also have to maybe adjust their organization so that they can be compliant with the regulatory organization. So it kind of is a nuance there where you may actually have to change your policies. You may have to change how you're doing things so that you can pass that audit or questionnaire. And I love how Michael mentioned earlier in regards to cybersecurity insurance. So this is kind of part of if you have cybersecurity insurance, you probably got a questionnaire from them every year saying, hey, are you doing these things? And then your rate is determined by that, right? If you're not doing those things, or if you filled out incorrectly, right, where you're like, I'm not quite sure if we're doing that, I'll put yes, and you were to file a claim, it's the same way with anything in insurance, right? If you don't disclose information, or if you disclose incorrectly, you may not be able to get that claim fulfilled. So being ready to fill an audit, being ready to actually answer those questions, those custom questions uniquely to that audit, is super important for your organization. Wow, we covered a lot of information today. We're coming right up on the top of the hour. If anybody has any questions they'd like answered, we tried to answer all the questions that were submitted in your registration. So feel free. We have a couple more minutes to answer questions. I think we got a couple coming in here that we can answer. As those are coming in, I did want to mention as well, if you do need help with any of this, we have affordable plans for small organizations. Go to our website, nwtex.com. You can book kind of a no obligation 30-minute conversation with us, where we'll talk about your specific needs, your compliance issues, and then we'll see if our cybersecurity plans can meet those needs and help you get compliant. So we did have a question coming in here that somebody mentioned that back on the MFA portion, that they actually used their phone number. Their phone number got compromised, and they're actually able to use that phone number to get into their account. So my account was, the person said, my account was hacked by somebody getting access to my number. That's a pretty rare cyber attack, even though it does happen. So a lot of times we recommend using things like authenticator apps, like Google, Microsoft have some great authenticator apps. Your password manager as well. We love password managers, 1Password. We have a whole webinar on it. If you go to our website, you can watch the webinar on password management. In fact, we have a bunch of other webinars as well, if on different other subjects related to technology that you can watch there. But in regards to passwords and phone numbers and MFA, using a password manager is super helpful for addressing that particular need. Fantastic. And it looks like we got all the questions answered. Once again, if anybody needs help, please reach out to us, nwtex.com/discovery call. You will be receiving a recording of this webinar. And if you have any questions in regards to the webinar or want handouts, feel free to reach out to us at hello@nwtex. Thanks again, Michael and Nick, for being a part of this webinar. We're right at the top of the hour. I hope this was super helpful for everyone. Our goal here is to equip you, educate you in regards to the areas you need to tackle. If you want to learn more about our organization or other webinars we have on Microsoft 365, on password managers, internet reliability, all that fun stuff, check us out at nwtex.com. Thanks everyone again for joining us today. Thanks again for the panelists. Everyone be well, be safe, and take care.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Nick.